Welcome, everyone. This is our 11th Discovery Workshop in our series of 14. Today, we are featuring technology specialists, those pioneering in the innovation space, and those individuals who have been researching all the different funding that has funding options available in service to system improvements. And so glad that you're here. So glad that you can join us. We're going to start with a brief overview of the bigger project that this is a part of, and then we're going to jump into introducing you to the panelists and get straight to our questions. And so again, thank you so much for joining today. We've got about 300 people following along, both in person for those who can join, and then on our YouTube channel. And so as you enter, if you want to change your name to present your name, title, and organization, that would be great. Gives everybody a chance to get to know each other. And as you have questions as we go along, what we do in this space is we prioritize the time for our panelists. And so we want to make sure that they have as much airtime as possible to tell their stories. And so we want questions. We love your questions. What we ask is throughout today, you put them in the chat. And then what we do is we gather them up and we share them with the panelists and then report back out and share their responses. And so again, we love your questions. Please make sure to write them in the chat, and then if there is time, we will pick one or two, but typically we save them up, we share them with our panelists, and we share it back out so everybody has an opportunity to answer. And so let me just share my screen with you. So here we are. So this is part of a 2-year whole system future search strategic planning initiative called the Improving the Circularity of Compostables and Compost. This is our 11th Discovery Workshop focused on compost industry technology, innovation, and funding. We have an antitrust statement. I will read the top part. The Future Search Initiative includes and involves stakeholders from various industries. Some stakeholders may be considered competitors in the marketplace. The Future Search process shall not be used to obtain individual company advantage, nor used in the pursuit of any anti-competitive objective. To do so violates state and federal antitrust laws. And so by participating in the Future Search events in this process, you agree to abide by the restrictions set out in this statement. And so here we are all together. We are involving you and the whole system in a whole system strategic planning project. And so this is a project where at its core, we are imagining a future where there's a cohesive and seamless collaboration across all organizations that are part of the U.S. composting system. And so this 2-year initiative is a whole system strategic planning and systems change effort focused on engaging pioneers like you from all parts of the system to come together to create a shared vision and collective roadmap toward optimizing the circular economy of the U.S. composting industry. So this work centers, but is not limited to food contact compostables. And for the strategic planning event that is going to be hosted at the end of September, we are being guided by a future search model. So this project is guided by an incredible steering committee cross-sector representing 26 organizations. We've got 30 folks that come together every other week to help us in guiding the planning and bringing together all the right stakeholders into this process. We have been lucky to have been launched and supported by a number of different organizations that have joined us as circularity partners, sharing and giving both their time and their funding to support this project. This project is not funded by one sponsor, it is funded collectively. And so there's opportunities to be a part of that for anybody here and anybody within the industry to invest in this thought leadership. So when we talk about circularity, what are we talking about? For the U.S. composting system, that means that the intentions of compostability are realized for compostable packaging, organic materials, and that the end products produced are able to be put back into meaningful use. And so when the steering committee set out, their first mission was to come up with their intention statements about this project. And so you're looking at those now. First being designing an inclusive whole system circularity model for the health of the composting industry that maximizes environmental benefits, improving collaboration and coordination and information flow between brands, packaging design, points of material sorting, commercial composting processes for the increased value chain effectiveness, directing more food waste to commercial composting facilities that creates value and confidence for all stakeholders in the system, and to shift stakeholder behavior to mitigate contamination and the impacts of contamination. So this project is like an hour class. We begin with everybody. So everybody is invited to be involved in the discovery work of the strategic planning process. And so we begin with everybody. We are concentrating into a group of 200 at the end of September, where we are doing a 3-day full system future search strategic planning event. If you're interested in joining us, we'll be putting that link into the chat. We've got an incredible group of people coming together. The intention is to have representation across all the different stakeholder groups. And then at that event, we create a strategic plan, a common ground agenda, and action plans for the support of the circularity of compostables and compost. And so in October, that is reported back out to the industry, and we begin the process of activating that strategic plan.
Good morning, I'm Ariel. I'm co-facilitator with Candy in this process. And yeah, this slide here, it just shows a little bit of who we've been talking to in the Discovery Workshop series. We've got 3 left, or 2 left, or 3 left after today. We're at number 11, which is in compost industry technology and funding. And there was a link in the chat that we put in right in the beginning that has a link to a public folder of the theme data and insights from all of these different discovery workshops. So this is open source knowledge and information that you can use as a data point, and it's also data points that we're going to be using and bringing into the room for the strategic planning session in September. And really, the purpose of this is to have like a cohesive, common understanding of the current state before we start future state planning. And this is, we have our YouTube channel. So if you missed any previous sessions, they're all here on the, I'll just put this link in the chat one more time because it's got the data, and it's also got the link to the YouTube channel. So there's a lot of rich knowledge that's, we're working across boundaries here. We want to support one another. This is in the essence and the spirit of this is for the whole system. And so let's share information in a way that's going to improve the health and the effectiveness of the whole system together. And without further ado, we can shift into who we have for our panelists today. So we have a great lineup of folks from varying organizations, play varying roles, and have wisdom to share on both technology, innovation, and funding. So first off, Nora Goldstein, editor from BioCycle, Caroline Berry, program manager, Closed Loop Partners, Chris Luce, CEO and president of SmartSort AI, Michael Wagner, Coromat Inc., CEO of Coromat Inc., Jeremy Lang, founder of Pila and Lomi, Sashti Balasundaram, CEO of We Radiate. So thank you everyone for being here. I'm really excited to learn what you have to share. We've got some questions here today that will be going one by one. They're generally the same questions we've been asking folks across the board to get a well-rounded data set. And we'll start with the first one, which is tell us about how your organization interacts with the U.S. composting system and what role does it play in helping to shape the industry. So we will start with Nora.
Hi there. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm Nora Goldstein. I'm editor of BioCycle. I've been in the editorial staff of BioCycle since the late 1970s, so have had the opportunity to watch this whole industry evolve. Each decade has promise and frustration, and that part certainly hasn't changed up till today. Our brand name for BioCycle is the Organics Recycling Authority. So when the question asked how have we influenced or helped shape, I'd say it's important to note when our magazine was founded as the journal Compost Science in 1960 by my father, Jerry Goldstein, there was not an industry. So it's fascinating when you look at the editions of the magazine starting in 1960 The advertisers from a technology standpoint were from typically the ag or the mining industry. So there was no dedicated composting equipment per se. That obviously has changed. In terms of how we inform and help shape, our archives online date back to 2004. So there are probably thousands by now of posts, feature articles, how-to articles, finance articles, just about everything. And then I'd say one of the ways we inform ourselves and stay on top of trends is we conduct surveys. Most recently was in 2023, we surveyed full-scale food waste composting infrastructure in the US and also residential food waste collection access in the US. And those reports are available on biocycle.net. So I'll end there.
Awesome. Thank you for being with us today, Nora. Carolyn.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. I'm Caroline Berry. I am the program manager of Closed Loop Partners Composting Consortium. And I think it's helpful to just understand sort of the context of how Closed Loop Partners functions and is structured. Closed Loop Partners has 3 business verticals. We have a capital management arm, an investment arm that is comprised of several funds from venture to buyout. We have an operating vertical, which is made up of several different companies. We are actually the largest privately held recycling company in the country. And finally, we have an innovation vertical, which is where I sit. Our innovation arm is known as the Center for the Circular Economy. And at the center, really what we do is we're focused on solving material challenges that can help de-risk this transition from a linear supply chain to a circular supply chain. And we do that by bringing together different stakeholders across the value chain. In the case of the composting consortium, those stakeholders are, of course, specific to the composting ecosystem. And the consortium is one of several initiatives that are sort of housed in our innovation arm. And to keep it short and sweet, the composting consortium is really on a mission to scale food waste composting and create end-of-life options for compostable packaging, food contact compostable packaging, really. So that's how we interact with the composting system at large. And that's a little bit of context as to the lens I'll bring in today's conversation regarding investment and innovation. Great to be here.
Great. Thanks, Carolyn. Now let's go over to Chris.
Hey, good morning. Good afternoon, everybody. Chris Lewis, CEO, co-founder, Smart Sort. We come at it from the innovation perspective. If you're not familiar with Smart Sort, we have patented methods and processes around using artificial intelligence and computer vision to educate and guide consumers into the correct waste stream, be it compost, recycle, landfill, or reuse. So we have implemented technology into arenas and airports, and we really interact with the compost system at end-of-life treatment, if you will, educating that consumer, that traveler, to correctly dispose of that waste item. And we are a data company. We track each and every individual waste disposal activity, is what we call it. And we actually log that data into a ledger system, which allows the venue and the city or the stakeholders to associate and view into the data to see what's being disposed of into life at the trash can.
Great. Thanks for being here today, Chris. And then Michael. You are on mute.
All right, can you hear me? Cool.
Yep.
All right, so hey, I'm Mike Wagner. I'm the founder of Cormat, and we're a company that makes high performance PLA packaging. So that's things like this. So it's PLA, but it uses a third the material of competitors, so it's a lot lower in cost. And what our role in this industry is that we've done a bunch of trials with people, and in general, people aren't very good at sorting waste and may not care, in all honesty. Here's actually a trial we just did with Amazon, where the recycle bin, the compost bin, the trash bin all look identical. And so I'm a pretty big advocate for automatic sorting. And PLA packaging is worth a lot, and so it can make sense to pull it out of waste streams and enable sorting. And so what I'd say is, as a manufacturer, I'm selling products in the industry, like all our stuff meets certification. So I've been through that process, but then I'm also trying to make it so that, sorting happens more widely and more funding gets, put into sorting programs so that we can really solve the problem. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Jeremy.
All right. Good day, everyone. I'm Jeremy Lang. I'm one of the founders of Pila and Lomi, and we are on a mission to create a waste-free future. And where we kind of maybe come at this a little bit different is actually we started by developing a material that could be biodegradable and compostable called flax stick using flax straw waste. So, and then 2011, we launched a phone case. We're trying to keep plastic and food scraps out of the landfill, but we started with plastic. So we launched a compostable phone case called Pila. And along the way, we realized that we realized the challenge that the composting infrastructure had. So, we did a Pila 360 program where we take our products back, but we realized that, hey, there's a big contamination issue here. We felt the compost industry's pain. So we're like, well, what if we developed a device that could decentralize and democratize waste management and make it so at the residential household level that people could take their certified compostables, put them in a machine, it breaks down, it goes to the compost facility where it's already screened. It's already the hardest part of the disintegration, portion is already mostly taken care of, or in some cases completely disappears. And then, so keeping plastic out of the landfill and keeping food waste out of the landfill. So that's what we did with Pila and Lomi, and we're excited to look at different ways. We all have the same goal, keeping food scraps out of the landfill and getting it back to the soil, and also keeping plastic out of the landfill. So that's what we're focusing on now, and we're excited to be part of these type of events to see how we can really work together to try and increase the amount of products that are kept out of the landfill and the amount of food waste that's kept out of the landfill.
Thanks, Jeremy.
That's it.
Sashti.
Hi guys, my name is Sashti and the company is We Radiate. We are 5 years old at the moment and our focus is on revitalizing soil health. So we do that through a data-driven approach, a systematic approach where we have both sensors that we're manufacturing. We're based in New York, manufacturing this equipment and platform in New York State. And we sort of work with both farmers, government officials, or composting facilities to utilize this temperature data or other sensor information to improve their operations, to improve regulatory compliance. But we also realize education is important as well, previously working in government. So we also help and support governments or municipalities, or doing workshops with community groups and stakeholders to talk about food scrap diversion programs, contamination issues, how do you improve your site design. So in relationship to sort of what are these bigger arching themes, it's sort of creating quality in this space. So we could ensure using data to hit PFRP standards. We also work with sort of partners and to support composting infrastructure in selected partner sites. So we're looking forward to sort of expanding that and sort of sharing that knowledge. So we realize that our technology can fit really nicely with other equipment as well. So sort of bringing that partnership approach online. We also work with municipalities and governments. I think people want to do good, especially previously working in government. I think governments want to do good, but they don't necessarily know or how. So we sort of guide them and train them to set up this, to set up these new laws that are taking place in terms of regulations and organics management. And I would say we're still a startup, so funding is certainly an ongoing thing that we're thinking about in terms of cash flow or investment. So happy to also explain that approach over the past few years as well.
Great. Thank you, Sashti.
That's great. And we're going to shift into our second question. My handy dandy timer decided that it needs a Zoom update. So we're not going to do that because we're all here. And so I'm going to manage that on the backside. So thanks for your patience with that. But so question 2, what does your organization believe are the greatest opportunities created by funding the U.S. composting system and innovative technologies to support it. And so we're going to start back with Nora.
Sure. So one of the things just historically in the composting industry, it really, in the very early days, composting facilities were being started by existing landscape, nursery businesses, land clearing businesses, in a way because they were users of their own product, in the sense that's part of what they would have to purchase. And it was timed around when a number of states banned yard trimmings disposal in the landfill due to perception of limited capacity. And I think that self-funding has continued in the space. So historically, the composting sector wasn't going out for investment capital, definitely going out for loans, leases, different kinds of debt financing. Today, fast forward, we have seen through the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure bill, different federal government sources of funding for the composting sector, which has really helped. And as far as what these opportunities to use this for technologies, for sure, capacity creation. And that's not just large scale. If anything, the surge is in smaller scale, decentralized facilities serving a specific community, and also niche organics haulers. So definitely a lot of entrepreneuring going on there. And in terms of technology innovation, we've definitely seen technologies being invented to address really persistent challenges. And for example, oh gosh, apologies for lack of remembering names, Chris, I think, you're targeting at contamination removal. And one of the things, and I'm sorry, hit me if I'm out of time or almost, but one of the innovations is in the same family of technology. Now I have to put on my go. Thank you. As Lomi, I've been an advisor to a company in that space called Mill, and what their technology innovation, it's a in-kitchen food waste dehydrator, but it has scales, and so it measures diversion. It makes it so that in the kitchen, it's a floor standing like a trash bin unit. Push the pedal, scrape your food scraps in. So it's a way to both address contamination and a persistent challenge, which is participation in food scrap programs. So there's definitely a role for the financing and the innovation.
That's great. Thank you so much. Such a wealth of knowledge and history. We're so lucky to have you here. Carolyn.
Yeah, Nora is always a tough act to follow. I love this question, and I'm quite excited to be talking about it because over the last couple of years, we have done some extensive research analysis and landscape mapping around the opportunities and challenges for investment in the composting industry. Just last month, actually, the consortium released an investment report which speaks to a lot of what I'll be talking about today in much more detail if anyone is interested. But from that research, really, we believe that the composting industry requires this blended finance approach to support its growth in the next decade. And when I say blended finance, really what I'm referring to is a mix of different capital sources that are working together, especially to support large-scale composting infrastructure. And through this blended approach, we can strategically combine public and private capital and bring together financing partners who have different risk tolerances and different return expectations. And within that blended capital framework, there are a number of instruments or mechanisms that play a role. So I'll speak to three of them. The first is grants and philanthropic funding. And these forms of funding are really essential seed capital to launching composting initiatives, especially in underserved communities where traditional economic models might not be viable. The second is patient and flexible capital, which offers longer investment horizons and more flexible terms, just as the name suggests. So this type of funding prioritizes both social and environmental impact alongside a trajectory towards profitability. But it allows compost businesses to navigate those initial growth phases without that immediate pressure for very high returns. And then the third is private equity, which can certainly play a role. Private equity investors are typically attracted to markets with more or with consistent growth potential and a path towards larger, more efficient operations. But each type of funding caters to a very specific need in the development cycle of a particular region or a technology or a composting business. So really by leveraging that sort of multifaceted approach, we believe that the industry can secure the capital it needs for innovation, for R&D, and for building large-scale composting facilities while also nurturing the growth of smaller established operators.
Oh, that's great. Would you be willing to put the investment report into the chat? Is that shareable that way? Okay.
Absolutely.
That's great. All right, Chris.
Yeah, I think this is probably my favorite question. I think what Caroline and Nora stated is spot on. We believe the greatest opportunities are for what we call material flow analysis. I'm sure everybody's heard that term. End of life treatment of products, how much reusable material is being diverted front of house versus back of house from landfill across all material types, compostable and recyclables. We understand the challenges as the fundamental market problem of cost, contamination, and education for the end user, being the venue, if you will, the facility that's operating and managing the consumers and the travelers that are at the place. So what we've done to support funding requirements is our technology has a display in it, and that display is being monetized and managed and governed by the venue. So now they can engage with corporate partnerships and sponsorships to actually fund the recycling and composting initiatives for the venue front of house. That brings in capital that allows them to support hauling that reusable material to the correct destination, be it compost or material recovery facility for plastic or aluminum. So we've partnered with some incredibly large beverage companies to deploy that type of solution set, which is why we're mostly in kind of these large venue, these high traffic areas, if you will, like airports or stadiums, because there's corporate partners that want to infuse their brand into that end of life treatment experience, and then just do general non-interactive advertisements as well. So we've kind of tackled that financing side from the venue's perspective, if you will, from the facility, to bring in new inflows to support the composting and recycling initiatives, because we all know they cost a little more due to contamination. And that's what we also feel that these digital signage have the ability to educate these consumers and travelers in motion, not having them stop, to guide them into the correct waste stream, which reduces contamination, brings back more reusable materials to the appropriate MRFs, and then, naturally reduces greenhouse gas emissions and such at the landfill if it's compost and material going to compost yards as opposed to landfill. So that's kind of our angle on it. We see that as the greatest opportunity to empower the facility operator to turn a cost center into a revenue generator. And hopefully that translates all the way to reusable materials out of the landfill, lower greenhouse gases, better data on material flow analysis.
That's great. And quite a flip of shifting that, changing it, what would be a cost center into a revenue generator. That's great. All right, Michael.
I'm coming through this time?
Yes.
Cool. All right. Yeah, I also like this question. I think we're at a nice point in history where people are finally looking to solve problems. I've been in sustainable packaging for 20 years, and 20 years ago, nobody cared. 10 years ago, people kind of cared. 5 years ago, they made proclamations that didn't come true, and now they're really trying to fix it. And so what I look at it is that, the energy used to make plastic packaging and then organic waste rotting into methane and landfill drives about 5% of climate change. And people are interested in making significant impacts in climate change. And so I think that's the big opportunity here, is that, you know, people are finally willing to make big investments into really solving problems in, you know, ocean plastics, climate change, and other things. And so, I mean, what I view is the big opportunities are also that states like Washington and California and New York are experimenting with legislation that are really driving change. And so I think there's been a lot of grassroots effort which hasn't made that big an impact. Like composting is not universal so far, but I think with, you know, significant investments into technology and significant, you know, shaping of legislator towards solving problems, that there's finally like a real path toward action here, which I think is pretty exciting.
That's great. All right, Jeremy.
All right, yeah, opportunities. You know, one way we think about it is, instead of the compost infrastructure centralized system, what if we thought of that system as not just ending at the fence, extending into the households? So what if that, you know, the bins, you know, we have our green bins now, we have our compost bins. What if the bins were actually these smart waste appliances or these food scrap recyclers? So that way of thinking. And we like to think about, you know, let's think it's 10 years from now or 5 years from now, and these type of devices are ubiquitous and everyone has one. So like Nora said, like our Lomi 2, you can measure, you can incentivize. We know how often people are using it. We know how much the waste is decreased. We're decontaminating it. We're providing a lighter feedstock for the compost facilities and less trucks on the road. You don't have to come every week. You can go every month or two. So that's the way we envision it, and we're really excited about that opportunity. But it's a little bit of flip of the way of the thinking. It's not just, and this is, we're going to get into it, how everyone has to work together. But it's not just the compost facility inside the fence. It's like, what if it starts at the household, and that's where, you know, you're getting a cleaner feedstock and it's dehydrated and there's less weight, less trucks on the road, and more people are participating in it. Like Nora said, that's the biggest thing that we've seen. We have over 200,000 units in market now, so we're getting a lot of good feedback. And the address that, I think it's, 4% of food scraps are composted. Let's get that higher by all working together and getting more material in there. And you know, like the other neat thing, that opportunity wise, we actually worked for the last 2 years with Gold Standard to create a new methodology to get verified carbon credits. So in areas where the default is, you know, there is no food scrap collection at the residential level and food scraps are going to the landfill, if they have these type of devices and we're proving that it's keeping it out of the landfill, it's a verified carbon credit, because we keep preventing those greenhouse gas emissions from happening. So those are things that we're really excited about that can help to, you know, move the needle and help, you know, the towns and cities and everyone participate in this, and even the compost infrastructures.
That's great. Thank you. All right, Shashti.
Yeah, there's a lot of good points. I'm trying to differentiate what was being said, but I think Michael mentioned something about climate. I would say We Radiate sort of defines ourselves as a climate tech entity. So sort of connecting composting with climate initiatives, I think, can be a powerful driver in the future. Just research, I think the World Economic Forum says that the solution versus the problem of how much we could, that's why we're looking at soil, but the cost of climate issues would be about $30 trillion, whereas the solutions to like develop those options would just be about 4 trillion. So trillion's 12 zeros. So you could say 30 trillion just to figure this out, versus 4 trillion with the solutions in place. So I think that sort of driver could make sense in terms of that economics. For me, I'm not an engineer. My background's in public health. I was a school teacher, but I'm building a hardware product. I'm building a software sort of entity. It's a hardware SaaS model. SaaS is software as a service. So I really needed mentorship and guidance to sort of develop this equipment. And the U.S. Composting Council, I was actually partnered with Jeff Gage for about a full year as a mentor-mentee. So that was really powerful. And I think more than having funding or getting investment, I think you have to have a team in place. And I think being in New York State has been really beneficial for us. We are considered part of this NYSERDA ecosystem, and I'll put in the chat. Essentially, it's New York State's renewable energy arm. So we're considered a startup under that. So we receive essentially guidance for mentorship, for financial projections, or building hardware, supporting us on software. So that mentorship has really helped us move forward. And then also we were actually able to win an award through New York State. It's called Grow New York. It's a food and agriculture competition. And we were competing with entities doing stuff in the farms or people creating food. And I think winning that competition helped us receive follow-on funding with New York State manufacturing grants to enable us to sort of create a local supply chain within the US, but also so the mentorship piece plus sort of local supply chain has really been interesting and an opportunity that I don't see. I think we're special and I think unique. And I think New York State pays high taxes, and that's maybe a reason for them to develop a sort of robust startup ecosystems.
That's incredible. And what you just described is just so incredibly thoughtful and inclusive. And here, even in this space, everybody here today, this is just such an incredible ecosystem and community, and so many different opportunities to support each other and help each other in this. And what you described as the mentor-mentee opportunity, that is, again, just another incredible space of learning. And, we all have so much to learn from each other. I want to just shift back really quickly to Michael for a second. And so, Michael, you have spent a lot of time in the innovation space looking at different funding options. And do you mind speaking for just a moment about just the different funding pieces out there that you see, like all the different groups that are offering different ways to fund?
Yep. Yeah. So we've raised about $5 million in grants for ourselves, $3 million for partners. And one of the most active funding mechanisms in the US is the SBIR program. So that's the Small Business Innovation and Research Program. And so a bunch of federal agencies have to give up 1% of their funding for small businesses to do research. And so there are, a bunch of programs you can apply for. We've been successful in winning state and foundation grants. And those are nice because those can actually match the federal grants. And so those, there's unfortunately no good central database for it. And there are a couple of databases out there, but they all tend to be out of date. And it tends to be just like a lot of networking and other things. And then we've also been approved for a USDA loan guarantee that can go up to $175 million. And also looked into a bunch of like tribal partnership business models for financing. And what I would say is that, sometimes people think of grants as free money, and it's just like any other sales process. Your grant writers are your salespeople. You have to do networking with the granting agencies to get the stuff out there. And prospecting is just like any other sales process. And then I think like a gap in the ecosystem is that the SBIR grants are meant for like early innovations, and that debt financing is available for once you're mature. But there's not really like a good like $5 to $20 million set of funding to subsidize things before you're debt financeable. And that's a real challenge in the industry right now. Is that the question you were looking for?
Yeah. And I know that, you have spent a lot of time looking for ways to fund innovation and solutions, to just kind of what's happening in the composting system. And so just wanted to give you an opportunity to share some of your insights. Okay, so we're going to shift over to question 3.
So question 3 is, what have been some of the greatest challenges you have observed or experienced when trying to create funding mechanisms or innovative technologies and solutions for composting? So we've started talking about this a little bit. Feel free to elaborate or kind of take it in a new direction. Let's start with Nora.
Sure. Michael, you just covered one of the points I was going to make, which is that gap in funding between your startup phase. You got your, I'm going to speak to a composting facility versus a product, but you've got your site, you've got your basic equipment, and you've got the flow of organics coming in. And then it's like, okay, but we're not really efficient. So we need some funding to make this a more efficient operation. For example, going to turn piles, to aerated static piles, where you've got more, and I'm focusing on food waste composting as well. And so, oh gosh, Closed Loop Partners and another venture firm, they did early stage financing for a composting facility specifically to create that, bridge that gap to the next level of scaling. And so that was great. And then those investors cashed out, and a much bigger investor group bought the company and then started acquiring facilities or scaling up their own. And this is where you run into challenges with, you know, the financing side, because the whole thing about composting is, even though the methods are true from one to the other site, the reality is that there's always a, it depends. And in many cases, it depends. And so not as predictable as to, from a financing standpoint, okay, we're going to scale this, we're going to do this, we're going to have this mass, you know, multiple flows of compost coming in. And compost is just, it's a biological manufacturing process. So it needs a lot of tender, loving care. And then you have the issue of contamination. So I think part of what's so critical in the financing is really getting an understanding as an investor or a lender, what it is that's really needed. And happy to elaborate. The other thing before I run out of time from a technology standpoint is there is no silver bullet. You cannot invent something this is it. This is going to take care of everything. The latest iteration of that, we've seen earlier iterations, is 24-hour composting devices. We are going to put in enzymes and heat, and we're going to make compost just 24 hours. I just watched a video this morning of a company promoting that. And you cannot physically, biologically, chemically make compost in 24 hours. So there's also really being aware of the so-called silver bullets. And there have been many, many of them over the many decades, you know, over my little shy of 50 years. So, thanks.
Great. Thanks, Nora. Yeah, we need the diversity of approaches and angles and thinking. And that's what I'm loving hearing from all of the different panelists. So thank you for all the work that you're doing. And let's go over to Carolyn.
Yeah, sure. You know, I'll just start by clarifying that the consortium is part of our innovation center. So we don't currently offer funding. However, our capital management team has funded different composting projects and businesses in the past. That said, I can certainly speak to the challenges that we have observed through our research and experience over the last few years on this topic. Nora spoke to this earlier about how traditionally US composting infrastructure has relied heavily on bootstrapping, personal savings, you know, friends and family contributions, angel investors, even debt financing. And those funding sources, while really crucial in the initial stages, tend to fall short when it comes to scaling infrastructure, especially in the context of meeting the nation's growing need to divert more food waste, and potentially along with it, food contact compostable packaging. So three sort of key challenges that come to mind are capital intensity, for one. For example, you know, establishing a greenfield full-scale food waste composting facility really necessitates some serious upfront investment. That could range from anywhere from $1 million to $20 million, with really long lead times of up to several years before revenue can be generated. And that includes the time it takes to secure land, acquire equipment, develop infrastructure, and of course, navigate the permitting process, which differs state by state. So there's significant CapEx costs to be considered, which is challenging. I think another thing to highlight is offtake agreements. The lowest cost financing options are typically reserved for operators who have secured these long-term guaranteed purchases for their finished compost. That's also known as an offtake agreement. So a long-term offtake agreement, those are actually less common in the composting industry compared to the recycling industry. So it's really something that I think the industry needs to take into account, especially as more states are rolling out these food waste policies and climate policies. You know, for example, can these policies require, or excuse me, if they're requiring that food waste be diverted to composters, perhaps there should also be some regulation and requirement around offtake agreements to ensure stable markets for the finished compost. And then the last thing I'll highlight as a challenge is just a general, I think, lack of support for operators and developers as they expand from a single facility site to multi-site operations. That can be really challenging. And this is crucial because demonstrating a successful track record of scaling a compost business is very essential for attracting larger, more traditional lenders who might otherwise be a bit hesitant to invest due to those like longer payback periods that are associated with composting projects. And similarly, you know, in order to appeal to a patient or catalytic capital investor, composting businesses really need to showcase these efficient scaling strategies. They also need to showcase diverse revenue streams beyond just compost sales. And I think having a strong management team with a proven track record certainly helps too. So I think these are things that composters are already doing in many ways, but bringing more transparency and clarity and shining a light on that is so important to help inform and educate investors in this space. Because Nora said it well, there's no silver bullet. And similarly, you know, each composting business is so unique. Therefore, the funding, the appropriate funding mechanism to help that composter will look very different depending on the situation.
Great. Thank you for sharing all of that knowledge with us.
Yeah.
Let's go over to Chris.
Yeah, certainly anytime from an innovation perspective, you're pioneering new technology, it takes time and capital, right? And the funding is quite challenging, but I'm not going to touch on that point because it's been carried very well. I think actual real world knowledge, and this is what I love about our community about this, about how things actually break down in the compost yard versus how they're marketed front of house, if you will. To me, that was so invaluable. I learned the difference between a soft knot and a hard knot on how the custodial crew ties a compost bag. And a soft knot will break down real quick. A hard knot will take longer. So leaning on this type of community to learn real world field implementation outcomes and what actually works and transfer that knowledge from, you know, back of house, if you will, at the compost yard, all the way to the venue, I think will be critical in solving some big problems that make these materials like Michael's, which I know decompose and such, make them more realistic and being broadly deployed inside these venues, because the venues want to do the right thing, but the contamination fees and all these sorts of things really hamper their ability to implement some of the new supply chain materials that do break down. Or maybe are recyclable at a little higher cost. So long story short, being able to be associated with a community like this, that we can learn that real world knowledge, that could cover the gap in some of the biggest challenges I see out there for compost system.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Michael.
Yeah, I mean, I see a lot of the big challenge in the industry are just kind of like a lack of why right now, and that people coming together about why we need composting and waste sorting. And I would advocate for a position that, you know, composting and better packaging can make a dent in climate change, human exposure to toxic chemicals in packaging, reducing ocean plastics and creating more jobs. And basically just like if the industry could come together on a scorecard for how effective proposed solutions are for, you know, ameliorating those problems, that would be really helpful. And kind of towards that end, I think one of the challenges that the industry faces right now are in legislation that aren't shaped by trying to solve those 4 problems, but instead being shaped more by existing industries. And so right now, for instance, the California EPR legislation, it's created tremendous uncertainty on the supply side, on the packaging side of the industry. So people are not really funding much innovation or trying new things these days. They're just kind of knee-jerk going towards, we need to go towards PET because it's the only thing that might get recycled in California, so we won't get fined. So I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges, is just like a lack of consensus about what we're trying to solve here and why, and then what sort of legislation is needed to enable things that really solve the problems.
Yeah, definitely good conversation to explore there. Okay, we're gonna go over next to Jeremy.
All right. Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. Challenges, I think just it's been mentioned, but every city, town, all the different stakeholders, it's very fragmented, all the different micro haulers, major haulers, who's doing what, the compost facilities. So that is a challenge. And I think the other challenge is just, yeah, the why, the educate, why do we need to do this? So, but there is hope. I think if we look at the 120 billion pounds, I think roughly, of food scraps that, are created every year. So, and there's 120 million households, right? So 1,000 pounds per household is the kind of the big number. And right now, I think 7 billion pounds is being composted. Like if we had 10 million of these devices out there, just as a start and as one piece of the puzzle, like not just our device, but other ones, we can process 10 billion pounds and get it a cleaner feedstock for the compost facilities, less weight. And talking about scaling compost infrastructure, I think we know that I heard somewhere it's roughly 20% of all the expenses is decontamination. So just I know this sounds utopian, but if the compost facility was getting a cleaner feedstock, and if the compost facility didn't have to go every week to pick it up, could go every month, so they're saving labor, they're saving trucks, and the customer's happy. I mean, and we're measuring it and incentivizing it. These are the things that we're hopeful about to overcome these challenges. And yeah, but it's just a matter of, finding pilot studies, working together, and like proving that this can work in areas along with all these other technologies. And then let's prove it together. And then let's go. Let's build it out from there.
Great. Thanks, Jeremy. And then Sashti.
Yeah, and I think how do we create impact assessments? So in that sense is when governments know that landfilling and sort of tipping fees, it's more inexpensive than building out new facilities and composting. So is there another metric? And Michael sort of mentioned it. Is there a scorecard? But what would an impact assessment be that's not necessarily connected to financials? So is it a way of changing the RFP system where you're not looking at the bottom line, but maybe looking at job creation? Is there a different matrix that we could sort of promote where we could look at potential carbon sequestration with composting versus just going to landfilling? So I think we have to think, uniquely, not just like the numbers, but what is the added benefits in terms of community, economic, environmental, and financial. I think we are trying to do that with WeRadiate in terms of what is that impact assessment that we could provide to our clients. But I think the community or the sector as a whole has to sort of understand that, because states or cities they don't understand the value. So how can you share that value in a different manner? That's one aspect. And I think the second that's kind of difficult, we do hear about carbon credits. It was talked about, but I know carbon credits right now, at least with soil, might be a little bit difficult to quantify. But right now it's been done sort of with forestation. So if you're planting trees, that's pretty easy to quantify, and you could get some sort of numerical value or money for that financial funding. But with climate and sort of carbon credits with composting, that is sort of mysterious. And I'd love to, if somebody has more info on that, but I think that could be it's a challenge now, but I see it as a potential future opportunity.
Oh, that's great. We've got our 4th question that I'll put into the chat. So what should other stakeholders in the supply chain, the solid waste management system, regulators, everybody in the system, so what should everybody else take into consideration when problem solving around some of the issues and challenges that you've talked about? What would be the most helpful? And so we're going to start with Nora.
Yeah, and I'm going to build off what Sashti just said, because you reminded me a decade or so ago, BioCycle really got enthused about silo busting in a jurisdiction. You know, you had your wastewater silo, you had your solid waste silo, you had your electric or utility silo. And one of the things that became very evident, it started with what they called fatbergs. So essentially, really big blobs of fat, oil, and grease clogging sewer lines. And then with these huge rain events, it would back up, you know, the sewer drains, and everything would come shooting out, flooding the roads and everything. And I created a slide of, you know, kind of like these pies, and showing how, you know, okay, so let's go back to the fatbergs. If you take that fats, oils, and grease and put it directly into the anaerobic digester at the wastewater treatment plant, you keep it out of the sewer, and then you compost the digested solids. You use that compost to build green infrastructure in your community so you can infiltrate the stormwater. And the other piece of that, which is wastewater treatment plants are the single biggest user of electricity in a municipality's budget. So by generating the biogas, they can actually become net zero. And we knew this was going to be it, but you had to bust down those silos. So I think, you know, one of the things you made me, I forgot about that, because, you know, that never went anywhere, and we move on. Now we're all excited about, you know, numbers that show why it's important to keep food waste out of the landfill. Food waste accounts for 58% of landfill methane emissions. Gosh, that's a no-brainer. Just keep it out, right? We'll see where that goes. But in terms of supply chain, so I'm sorry, I just had to go on that little soapbox. One of the things, and I've been involved in the composting consortium as a technical advisor for a few years, is this idea from a compostable packaging standpoint of keeping the supply chain pure. And by that, I mean, how far up the chain do you have to go and establish critical control points, so that as though, you know, the packaging makes its way through, the composter is getting 100% certified compostable packaging. You know, so what does that supply chain look like in those critical control points? And one of the tools that has happened in a very small handful of states is labeling. You know, being, you know, like every product coming through that supply chain has this label with this tint, you know, and has been, you know, field tested, it's been lab tested, it's certified. So those, think about your critical control points in your supply chain. And then somebody mentioned earlier, and I'm just going to reiterate, transparency is so important. Make sure no matter what foot you have in this, you know, in this game, what skin you have in the game, that you're transparent and you're willing and honest to be, you know, you're willing to be transparent. I think we can learn so much from each other, and that way all boats rise, something like that. Thanks.
Yeah, that's great. All right, let's hear from Carolyn.
Yeah, I think the top line consideration is that there's just tremendous power to be had in matching the right types of capital to the specific needs in the composting value chain. And, you know, several people have said it today, there's no one size fits all approach to financing that will work for this industry. And I think that's why it's so critical to take this strategic blended approach. And in doing so, you know, by deploying those different types of capital, we can create a more sustainable ecosystem, I think, for food waste diversion. And for the next couple of years, you know, we're really doubling down over at the consortium on this concept and on these topics, and we're excited to continue working with the industry on this. We actually just launched this new platform called the Composter Innovator Program, and we're bringing composters to the table to elevate their voices and really play a key role in shaping the future of the industry on topics that we've talked about today, like financing, like contamination, like scaling composting infrastructure. And really our hope is that we can really work together, rather, to help inform critical business decisions, but also policy decisions related to innovation and to funding for this industry. So if anyone's interested in learning more about that program, please don't hesitate to reach out. Had to shamelessly plug it, but it's an open invitation to the industry. So happy to drop a link in the chat as well if anyone wants to learn more.
That's great. That's exactly what I was going to ask. All right, let's switch over to Chris.
Caroline, I think that was a great plug, because that to my point on question 4 is that you know, the solid waste management side is, I believe, you know, relatively good informed, but the regulators, the policymakers, they need to become much more educated on what's going on. If you look, I can't know if y'all tell her or not, but I'm in the state of Texas, and in 2019, the solid waste management was a $4.9 billion economic impact to the state. So if these regulators and these policymakers start looking at it from all angles, not only materials out of the landfill for benefit of composting and less greenhouse gas and all that sort of stuff, but flip it in and look at it from a business perspective, that this is an economic impact to the state. It becomes reusable material you can entrust ship inside your state, or, you know, ship externally, whether it be to Dominican Republic or Mexico, some of these other manufacturing places that are close to us, and of course here locally as well. So I think that what Caroline had stated, that forum, as well as this community here, these are the sorts of conversations that need to somehow, some way reach it to the regulators to mandate composting, and then not have trucks or yards to take the material is tough for a business operator. So I think we need to find a way to help educate these decision makers, these policy makers, and let them truly understand from the ground up. Get your hands dirty with some knowledge on what does the yard need, and then take it all the way up to products like what Michael have. And I love what Sashti's doing with the soil side. That is awesome. Hopefully we'll get more organic and natural fertilizers and pesticides and such out of these sorts of activities. So I would just simply suggest on question 4, we find a way to better inform these policymakers. Of course, us in the community are going to continue to collaborate and share and learn and such, but I think these policymakers, they need some help, in my opinion.
That's great. And you're talking about starting from the yard, and this project started from the piles. So
There we go.
Just about bringing everybody together to make sure we understand everybody's realities before we begin that wonderful problem solving process. So shifting over to Michael.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, just kind of trying to take it on another direction, but looking back, Nora mentioned silo busting, and then also the problem we're really solving problems is that it depends is the answer to a lot of technical challenges. And what I find in commercializing innovations is that a lot of capital will only give you capital if it's a clear line of profitability. And so you have to be, let's say, very optimistic in your projections, and you tend to focus on just scaling one approach, even if it doesn't work. And then if it doesn't work, you can't really be honest about why it doesn't work. And I think that's the reason why there hasn't been a silver bullet for waste so far, is because of both the silos and then the nature of innovation, where you basically have to pick your role and run with it. And so what I think would be most helpful for the industry would actually be like a very large waste innovation center, something with like 100 million, maybe a couple $100 million worth of funding. And then people could, over time, develop silver bullets for individual situations. So if you had, say, you know, like a center that's taking in city waste, then they could optimize solutions for that city waste based on the scorecard of climate, toxic, ocean plastics, and jobs, and develop kind of a flexible solution over time. And ideally, it would come from like public funding so that the people could publish their failures as well as, what actually works. And then that would also create an environment where like, let's say the waste ecosystem is really like 8 steps. Most innovations happen at 1 step. And right now you need to build all 8 to really, demonstrate a solution. So if you had something where you had, let's say 3 types of 8 solutions, and then you could run through all of them at pilot scale, work out the data over time, figure out what really works and iterate, that would be great. So I think like that would be my ask for the industry, is like figure out how to come together and like make demonstration centers that people really publish the data and show what works and what doesn't.
That's great. Yeah, the large waste and innovation center with demonstration centers nationally, that'd be incredible. All right, Jeremy.
Yeah, I agree with that, Michael. That's great. And also, I would just add, like, I think it's just getting, we mentioned pilot studies, but it doesn't have to be a whole city at a time. It can be, try it in a neighborhood, try it on a street with new technologies and say, hey, see what the results are. And if you're actually getting better results, how can we expand on this? So but yeah, in each situation, everyone is different. But I think I love the idea of like looking at the big picture. Like, are you at landfill capacity? Right? How much is it going to cost to expand your landfill? Or do you have to build a new compost facility? Well, what if we can, somehow make it so it's more efficient? You don't have to, or make the trucking more efficient. So when you're trucking it farther to the new, like those type of thing, that type of thinking. So, but it is a case by case basis. But I truly believe if we can get some pilot studies done, and I know some are happening, but more and more, and just get people saying, hey, we all need to work together on this, and we can do better together. So
that's great. All right, Shashti.
Shaking my head, I don't know. I'm just going to summarize. I think Nora, transparency, amazing. Caroline, I'm going to pick your brain. I want to know more about the innovation center that's happening. Yeah, and I think there is some steps. Chris was mentioning educating just the policymakers in general. They might write these rules, but maybe, and I think the example I want to share is in New York City, when New York City, in the last year, I believe, the mayor had defunded a lot of community groups, but a lot of the community groups then received assistance from the city council. And in just the last few weeks, city council then provided funding for these groups. But in some of these cases, there's no processing center in New York City. So that was still defunded. So these groups are now thinking about, okay, well, you gave us funding to collect material. Now our processing centers are not there anymore. So what do we have to figure this situation out? So it's like, it's more than just the money that you're giving us. It's how do we get the material from the a farmer's market or food scrap drop off to the processing facility? Where does that then go? So it's sort of that cycle. So it's more than getting that money or the policy, but what does that closed loop actually look like? So that's just a funny example. That's not funny, but this is a really a real life example in the last 12 months. And I think USCC is doing some of that. I think they are now saying, meet with your elected official, invite them to your site. And I think that's a great initial beginning to have them educated in these spaces as sort of a local lobbyer for these initiatives.
Well, and speaking so much to infrastructure, like how, you have the intention, and then everywhere, how does it move through, and can it move all the way through? And so how do you create true circularity without critical infrastructure? So yeah, it's a really powerful story, and so many hurdles just in the one community. And so imagine scaling that across the country, which is what we're talking about. So we have an additional question that we've shared with our panelists that we'll now share with you. We're going to shift to that next.
Yeah, so this is really in the realm of future thinking. We've got a lot of folks who are already, their minds already go to innovative solutions in the future. And so I'd love to just harvest and uplift anything else you'd like to elaborate on in terms of directionally what you'd like to see innovation and technology focus on. So Nora, if there's something you'd like to add, Go for it.
Yeah, I just want to take 30 seconds I would love to brainstorm with Michael about the scorecard and what's on that, and then brainstorm with those in the finance side is, okay, this has been our traditional, this is what's on our scorecard. And for a while there, ESG, that's what everybody was talking about. Was that on the scorecard? Well, then that gets shot down. So I think that would just, to really think through and hard what, where you set the playing field, set the ground rules, and then how to achieve that. And the Waste Management Innovation Center is a great idea. So I just wanted to capture that before we parted ways. But the one thing I wrote down, but that I didn't address, and it's a technology related thing is, we have seen over the many years the idea that, what, folks, don't worry, you don't have to sort anything, just keep it in the bag. We're going to take it to this high-tech sorting, optical, robotic, whatever, and we'll take care. The organics will fall through this screen and we'll be ready to go. And it's kind of like this lowest common denominator factor in a technology solution, and that's fine and well if you're trying to stabilize the organics but not use them in any productive way. But the reality is that the way I look at organics recycling is the main reason we're doing it is to create clean resources to put back in the soil. And so when you go to the lowest common denominator, you sort of mess that up. And so one thing I'm seeing currently is the lowest common denominator in the organics recycling space is depackaging equipment, traditionally designed for very more simplistic kinds of feedstocks to separate, off-spec beverages or foods from their packaging so you can manage the organics. And now they're, being used to handle commercial, just source separated organics. And so you get to that same question is, are you then, you don't bother separating anything at the source, just put it in, we'll take it, we'll put it in our machine. So it's a similar pathway. So I guess I don't know if that's what you were looking for, but it's an observation that the key, and this gets to what Jeremy and I mentioned early on, is somehow we have to change behavior and or keep everything that's flowing into the organic stream truly compostable. And so you still end up with that material going to soil. So I don't know if that made sense, but that's what I came up with on short notice.
Yeah, foolproof system where you don't have to rely on people understanding how to make the right choice. Yep.
Love it. Carolyn.
Yeah, what immediately came to mind for me was I would love to see innovation and technology focus on contamination. I mean, full stop, it is just the greatest challenge, I think, for the industry right now. It's incredibly frustrating. And I think that we've seen so many incredible advancements in things like, AI sortation in the recycling industry, just to paint a picture of one such example. I would love to see technologies like that continue to emerge and be translated to the composting industry. Contamination is definitely a beast of its own. I think even using sortation technologies, just as one example, it's different when you're dealing with feedstock that mainly consists of conventional plastics and glass and metals versus this sludgy, gooey, very difficult to decipher organics feedstock, which is often what's going to these compost facilities, right? Especially food waste composters. So I think there's a lot more research and development that needs to be done in this space. But yeah, contamination was the first thing that came to mind in terms of prioritizing technology and R&D dollars. And then I think the other thing I wanted to add is that when I hear the word innovation, I think I automatically default to thinking about technology and these futuristic concepts. But really, like, I think there's plenty of innovation to be had, even when it comes to things like communication and education. Several folks have touched upon this today, but even at the source, I think that in our communities, there's ample opportunities for municipalities to become a bit more innovative in their communication styles and their education campaigns, and even leaning into the world of social media. Like, how do we make it more mainstream in terms of getting the general US consumer, resident, citizen on board with understanding what all these materials are and really the value of composting. And similarly, there's plenty of innovation and exciting opportunities to be had further upstream with the brands and packaging manufacturers who make materials like compostable packaging, for example. Plenty of opportunity to be creative in those sort of marketing and labeling and design approaches. So I think you could classify that as innovation in a way too.
Great. So many leverage points needed from so many angles. Let's go to Chris.
And contamination is one of the big ones, right? And one of the things that positively influences contamination is a better informed consumer or fan or traveler. So I think education is critical as well, not to just kind of keep talking about the same topic as Caroline and Nora, but educating the guest, if you will, at the venue, or just the general consumer in the city of what you should do with a pizza box that has some pizza left in it, or what should you do with your dish soap jar? Can you rinse it out and recycle it? Those sorts of educational topics, some way to communicate to the general populace, if you will, a better message around why it's important and how and what. Just even if it's simple stuff, like just start with your pizza box on cardboard and your Cokes and your soda pops, if you will, and make sure those get recycled correctly at your municipality. So I think that would be a huge step. Me personally, we have behavior modification patents and stuff on the systems we do, but where I think the innovation needs to really focus for the future is it needs to empower corporate social responsibility initiatives and empower brands to actually communicate what they're doing for the environment in places like arenas and stadiums, because those are the entities that are funding edge equipment, if you will, out at the edge that's actually helping and recycling and composting and such. These are the entities that need to be able to communicate what they're doing, because then that's a return on investment that allows them to spend more money. And then from the yard up to the consumer front of house, if you will, to back of house, we can meet in the middle and hopefully get more reusable materials out of the landfill.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. Michael.
I think discussing both contamination and depackaging systems is really like an interesting topic for innovation right now. And there's kind of like the hammer mills, which are like an upside down lawnmower that just make particles of plastic and organic waste, and you get this really nasty slurry, to like more gentle screws. And I think that is something where there really is an opportunity with the advances in AI to really fix this problem. I don't know how many hundreds of billions have been spent on recycling and training consumers to recycle things and put them in the right bin. They have not been successful in America, in my opinion. And then in Seattle, where we have some of the best educated consumers, I think it's still like 20% of our trash is still food waste. And I don't think that labeling and consumer education are really going to fix this problem. I think that technology is the answer here, but it's that you need to throw lots of money at it, solve it at the pilot scale, and really fix it regionally over time to get rid of all those it depends. And then really focus on making sure that you're making all the stakeholders happy. One thing you said, Nora, was that you're doing this to make good soil. And I agree, you have to do that. But you also have to make sure that you're ideally not having toxics flow in from the packaging into the food while it's packaged, and then also working to reduce climate change. And I'm pretty bullish on sorting for, not to sound too much like a broken record, but I think, like that's where I'd like to see technology innovation is both, people trying out things, but then also getting engagement from the stakeholders, getting silo busting and really like valorizing the waste appropriately so that you're really fixing the problem is what I'd like to see.
Great, thank you. Jeremy.
All right, this is great stuff. And what we see as a potential opportunity is, again, getting back to that sorting equipment, not inside the fence, the compost facility. Some of it is, but what if someone's in the household? And what if these devices, like, it's not just ours, it's other ones, but you take a certified compostable, approved product, you put it in your device, you push the button with your food scraps, and it disintegrates, mostly or partially. And then it goes to the compost facility. So they don't have to sort it out. It's already, the hard part of disintegration is taken over. And then right now, it's at the point where the humans are making the decision. Am I going to litter or not? I'm going to put it in here. And products that aren't compostable in these devices don't break down. So getting back to the recycling, I think the seeing to believe it is very powerful when you put these, we've tested hundreds and hundreds of certified compostable products in our Lomi device. And when you see them go from a phone case into almost gone or packaging, the see to believe, people get that. I mean, just to help to incentivize them on that. So that's the one thing, but it can get to the point, like when we talk about, we're just getting started. This is a thought, like we can build upon this. So now add sensors in that. So when you close the lid and it can read, oh, this is not compostable, Buzz, it's not gonna, you can't put it in here. Now, it's just, I know that's a long way off, but maybe it's not. So coming together with all these technologies, just thinking of that. Why does the compost facility have to pay for all this stuff? Why not you know what's neat about that? Having it in the household, so a decentralized, centralized model together is, guess who's paying for a lot of the processing? The customer. And they're feeling good about it, right? Like, so you're getting, that's our vision. And I know it might sound crazy, but that's what we see. Those type of things. So using that type of technology and everyone working together on it because we all have the same goal, right? So that's it.
Yep. Great. Thank you so much. I just love all of these ideas and possibilities, and there's just so much potential in these conversations. So let's finish with Sashti. What would you like to add?
I wanted to go back quickly to what Nora was mentioning, question 4, because I think how this conversation built up, maybe there are stakeholders that are missing and maybe share that. So banks and lending opportunities, I know individuals have received grants and funding, but that funding doesn't come in time. So it's figuring out a bridge loan, and is there an opportunity in an organization that could provide them? So figuring out banks and financing organizations. I think education is key. So I didn't really see that in that circularity chart, but where does education fit? And then I know under elected officials, are there any laws that can be shared, or have there been good laws that can be shared from, the East Coast, Northeast to the Southeast, or vice versa, Pacific Northwest to other locations? So what are replicable laws that could be shared? Because I think these are all in silos. How do you break down those silos? And sort of question 5 in terms of innovation, I think it's sort of, is there partnership innovation? This is also a silo question. How do you create maybe cooperative technology models? People are doing these independently, and there's in-home kitchen sets. There's about 3 or 4 of them differently. I know you're on the call, Jeremy. So you have competitors, but are there other models, like we're creating sensors, but can we work with a larger equipment manufacturer? So how do we share maybe cooperative partnership models for technology that can benefit the world or regionally? Stickers on peels, that's a specific thing. Is there a way to just figure out stickers on peels? I'm not going to get into it, but that is a bane that I know can be figured out. I hope can be figured out very soon. And I'll stop there. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, and I love that you ended with adding a number of questions that we are going to catch and add to the rest of the questions that were asked in the chat. So we can give everybody on the panel a chance to answer those. And so as we do in these sessions, we encourage questions, and what we do is we capture them, we share them back out with the panelists, put together a panelist Q&A, and then we share that out. And so the link that's been shared a number of times about kind of the public Google folder with all the insights that have been shared throughout this entire series. It also includes those panelist Q&A as well. So that's where you will find it. And so one of the things that we wanted to highlight and spotlight before we end today is our very next session was an ad. We've done that a number of times in this series where this is an iterative process and a lot of things have been emergent. And so one of the things that has emerged was the opportunity to shed a little bit of light about how we got here. And so we have a number of wonderful panelists coming next Thursday to talk about the origin and evolution of food contact packaging. And so that is from 12 to 1:30 Eastern time next Thursday. And then after that, we will be speaking with municipalities and regulators. And then we have our finale session in September, and that is going to be about policymakers and policy. We are trying to coordinate that session to align with a live stream at the BPI Summit. And so the time may shift a little bit in that. And so if you get our calendar invites, then you will see an update on that once we get that confirmed. But that is where we will be closing. So just wanted to give our sincere thanks for all of you for being here with us. We've got about 300 folks following this along, and these are free to attend, free to share, publicly available. We will have this session posted live on our YouTube channel in a couple of hours. And so if somebody couldn't be here today and you really want to make sure that they see this, that's a really great one-stop shop for that. We have the U.S. Composting Council hosting the webpage for this project, and we also have a LinkedIn page where you can join in the conversation. So grateful to see all of you, have you here. So grateful for all the panelists and what you have brought to this conversation. Looking forward to seeing you next Thursday. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.